Hi, gosh, it has been a very, very long time since I've done a video, so I felt like getting back on here again. The bit I wanted to share with you today is a piece around vulnerability. I was just working with this on one of my lovely clients a couple of days ago on this particular piece that came up around her father, and um, it can be a really, really sticky piece. We can really struggle with the place of pain and of vulnerability around death. Um, a huge part of healing is being able to see death in a different way. And it's not about tricking yourself or saying mantras, just telling yourself it was better than it was. It's about looking for what you haven't seen. And we're just so conditioned. Those of you who've followed me for a while will know how much I talk about this. We're so conditioned to only see death in one way, to only see it in in a bad light, and to not be able to see any of the light, any of the beauty, any of the gifts, any of the growth and change that comes through it. And when you can look and see some of that, it really shifts everything. It really does. But a couple of these really sticky parts can be around pain and around vulnerability. In other areas of life, we can accept the place of pain and we can accept the point of vulnerability. But around death, we've just been sold this idea that the way somebody ought to die and that the good way to die is, pain free, no discomfort whatsoever, um, with all their dignity intact, and we'll get to that part. We talk about vulnerability, and that anything else is just awful and regretful. And I have written on pain before. I'll dig up some of those blogs and link them in this post. But vulnerability is a really important piece too. And the piece we were working on the other day with this client of mine is it's the most common place it comes up, but it's also the best example. And where I see this most, and where people will come to me and say, this man died, it was my brother, it was my husband, it was my father, and he was really strong. And he just, he either wasted away to nothing, or he couldn't do things for himself, or um, normally he was very strong, but he was crying and he was upset before he died. Or the ultimate, what we see is the ultimate shameful, pitiful, regretful state that someone can get to is this idea of they need help toileting. Um, and all of this is vulnerability. And the reason it comes up most strongly in this area, like around the men that we feel have been really, really strong, is sometimes you're just not used to it. You're just not used to it. And that's part of it. It can be very uncomfortable. And I shared the story with my client that my one of my grandfathers, he was a hard ass, that man. He really was. He was a hard man, and we didn't know him as a very kind or compassionate or loving or fun man. He was tough. And then before he died, he'd ended up in a rest home, and from memory, he had cancer, and it kind of wore him down. And we would go and see him, and he would start crying. He would be so happy to see us that he would start crying. And when are we coming again? And we want to hold our hands. And so I want to point out that because it can be very disconcerting, right? There's a part of you that just can find that so uncomfortable. And we did. We'd go, oh, God, like you just don't know what to do with this man. Um, we're not used to seeing that kind of, weakness. And so that can be tricky. So that's part of it. That can be very uncomfortable to see that in someone you've seen as very tough and very strong. But it's not always, the people who are strong or tough and a kind of a bit of a more toxic way like my grandfather was. Could just be the man who was a very he's just a strong presence. He was just a masculine man and he just took care of things. And then to see him crying, to see him, kind of brought to his knees can be really, really tough. So, and this is like I said, it's a really, really sticky bit because we can be stuck in this place of going, that shouldn't have happened. That shouldn't have happened. That was terrible. He would never have wanted that. Um, how, and again, sometimes this idea of a loss of dignity that they had to be helped to get dressed, a loss of dignity that somebody had to wipe their bum, that the family had to come and do it. Without seeing that there's a real place for vulnerability, there is such beauty. And often we can identify this easily in other parts of our lives that we're able to connect to each other when we're vulnerable. We're able to open up when we're vulnerable. We're able to, the masks, the stories, the faces, the fronts we put up are able to drop when we're vulnerable. And that can be a deadly uncomfortable thing. A lot of us don't like that. A lot of us find it very hard to do that. Um, but it's a place of honesty. It's a place of connection. It's a place of love. Um, and often it happens around death. There's a number of reasons. It could be someone's old and there's dementia involved. It could be cancer, a long period of time with cancer. There's all sorts of things that can, bring someone into a very vulnerable place, whether that's emotionally or physically vulnerable or all of the above. But it really is a beautiful space. It allows people to be open. It allows them to need others. Typically with people who are very strong and that's all you've ever seen of them, there can be, we all have weakness in us and we all have vulnerability in us, but there can be a fear in them of what would happen if the world saw them as weak, of what would happen if their family experienced them as weak. And so they hide it. And for some, this can be their chance to be weak, to be vulnerable, to need others, to be met in that place and realize that they're still loved. There is great openness, there's humility, there's honesty, there's comfort, there's love. All the masks can drop away, and it's different for everyone. So the example I just gave might not match your scenario, but there's other things in there. There's great beauty to be found, and often one of the hard bits for people can be, well, this man, my father died. He was just brought to his knees with cancer. He couldn't move. We had to dress him, we had to clean him up, and he would never, ever, 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 ever have wanted that. And sometimes the things we most need are the things we wouldn't choose. I can think of one. It's just such a beautiful story. A client of mine and her husband, this is how she saw it, that it was so terrible for him to be in this position of such weakness and needing his family to do these basic cares for him. But when she looked at it, she realized it was only in that space that he could receive how much she loved him. He'd never truly understood how much she loved him. And only in that space, everything was stripped away. And, he had to show this weakness and vulnerability that he didn't want to show, that he wouldn't have chosen to show. But there it was. There was no hiding it. There was no masking it. He couldn't block it out or hide it from anyone. And from that space, was he able to understand and see how much she truly loved him. He told her this. So there's just such beauty there. If we can get past this idea that everybody should be able to keep up whatever front they want, that it's a terrible thing for those we love to need our physical or emotional help, for us to be able to meet them in that place. And for us to understand too, sometimes if it's children looking to our parents, it can be very disconcerting that the parent as a child that you always looked up to, the roles have reversed. Now they need something from you. You need to care for them too. And that can feel wrong. There's a beauty there. There's such a beauty there in the care that we're sometimes able to provide, or the emotion that people are able to show, or the love that they are able to receive that couldn't have happened any other way. So like I say, your scenario might not fit the one I described, but look at it. Go in looking and seeing what is the beauty here. And I can promise you, because this is the work I've done for, I don't know, what, 12, 13 years, something like that now. And I go in without the question of, is it there? Because I know it is, it always is. And the vulnerability in yourself too. Again, as much as so many of us like to hide that, we don't like to see it. But to be able to see, what comes from that, where we're able to get to, what we're able to share, what we're able to let go of, how we're able to be supported and connect to others, and I mean, specifically to look at it around what you went through around the death as well. So there's a real place, there's such beauty to be found if you just drop the story that it's bad. Just drop the story that it's bad and go looking for the good and the beautiful. You know what was hard about it. You don't need to spend any more time figuring that out. But go looking for what was useful, what was good, what was beautiful about the vulnerability for them, and then for yourself. And I promise you start to find these things there. You go looking in the right way. Don't fight me too hard on it. Just go have a look. Just go have a look. And it's this kind of stuff that starts to shift your experience with their death and with grief forever. All right. Much love, everyone.